What's up, YouTube? Jeff Beck again here, and today I want to talk about iOS and Android. Now, you guys probably know I'm a Galaxy guy if you've been following my channel for a long time. In fact, I own a website called Sammy Guru, and we have a new channel called Sammy Guru on YouTube where we cover all Samsung news. However, for the last little over 2 weeks, about 16 days, I've been using the iPhone Air and the iPhone 17 Pro Max here. And I've noticed in talking to a lot of my friends who use iPhones as I've been using iOS, a lot of people still have misconceptions about Android, and I really don't know why these still exist in 2025. So I thought today, maybe not that anyone will listen to me, but I would talk about 5 misconceptions about Android that have kind of persisted over time that really are no longer true here in 2025. Now, the first one of those is that all Android phones are cheap, very cheaply made, and have poor build quality. Now, just looking at these 4 phones that I have on the table, which I chose for this, the iPhone, in my personal opinion, the iPhone 17 Pro Max, Apple decided to go this year with the aluminum. And I don't think the aluminum is as premium as something like the titanium frame here on the S25 Ultra. So I think actually when it comes to build quality, there's quite a few Android phones, and in fact, all 3 of these that rival or surpass the build quality of the iPhone 17 Pro Max. And I definitely think these 3 in particular, the S25 Ultra, the Pixel 10 Pro XL, and of course, the Galaxy Z Fold 7 are 3 phones that definitely can compete or surpass the build quality of the iPhone. I really do not like that Apple went with the aluminum frame. I think it feels cheaper, obviously not quite as durable. And in general, even though Apple has had great build quality over time, I think a lot of Android phones are going to end up surpassing them because of this switch back to aluminum. Now, I also happen to think that if you look at these phones, I think the iPhone actually doesn't look as nice as either of these 2 devices from Samsung. And even if you bring in the unique design language from our friends at Google with the Pixel 10 Pro XL, I kind of think this looks a little bit nicer. Now, in terms of actually being cheap in terms of price, well, that's definitely not true, because if we look at these 4 phones, you've got the Galaxy Z Fold 7 is a $2,000 device. This is the iPhone 17 Pro Max, which, if you, depending on which core storage configuration you get, this is the 1 terabyte. It's $1,599, but you can get one for around $1,100, $1,200. This is a Pixel 10 Pro XL, which is also around $1,100, and then the Galaxy S25 Ultra, which his original retail price was at $1,300. So definitely the top Android phones, and again, I'm kind of confining this to the US market. Obviously, there's expensive devices from Xiaomi and others in China, but compared to what's available and kind of top of the food chain in the US, these are not cheap devices, and they're definitely not cheaply made. They all have phenomenal build quality, and I would argue that they are actually built a little bit better in some cases and look a little better than the iPhone 17 Pro Max. Up next, let's talk about the second misconception, which is that Android phones are just more complicated to use than their iPhone counterparts. Now, this may have been true years ago because Android operating systems and the skins particularly were designed a little clunky and a little complicated and not well organized, but modern day Android operating systems and skins like One UI 8 and the upcoming One UI 8.5 and even the Pixel experience on the Pixel 10 Pro XL are beautifully designed and very similar to iOS, not only in ease of use, but also in the beauty of the design and the layout. Now, if you look in something like the settings menu, you'll notice that the settings are also very similarly designed, if you go back to the main settings page, to iOS. It's very simple to find exactly what you're looking for on your Galaxy phone or your Pixel phone or whatever Android phone you're using. And in fact, some Chinese OEMs for Android try to mimic their design, which I don't really like, but they try to mimic it like iOS so that Apple users will feel more at home. It's definitely not the case that Android phones are harder to use. However, because Android has so much more customization and you can do more with Android if you choose to, like having custom launchers, you can have, custom icon packs really simply. You can do all this really cool stuff. Android tends to get this reputation of being more difficult to use, when in fact, if you're just an average user and you just want that very simple experience, Android has that and can offer it as well. Now, a lot of people say, well, what about things like FaceTime? Well, Android has the equivalent of FaceTime, which is Google Meet. And of course, there are other great video apps out there. People say, what about using something like, if you're going to your photos, what about using something like AirDrop, right? So you have your AirDrop, you can AirDrop easily to your Mac. Well, Android and Samsung in particular, who pioneered this, have the Quick Share option, and Google adopted Quick Share, in fact, to use across the Android landscape. But Samsung developed this current version of Quick Share. It actually works better than AirDrop, in my opinion. AirDrop is actually quite buggy these days. And then, of course, lastly, if you talk about messaging and iMessage, well, of course, I know there are people who are stuck in that ecosystem. If you're younger, maybe people will make fun of you if you have a green bubble or whatever. But I would say for most of us who are my age, around in their 30s or 40s, that's probably not a huge deal. And there are great app solutions for messaging on Android. Not only do we have RCS, which you can get in Samsung Messages or Google Messages, and is also supported by the iPhone now, but I personally use Beeper, and Beeper works on both Android and iPhone, and this application allows you to get your messages across all of your platforms, which I can actually show you here. You can see here I've got my Facebook, Google Messages, Google Chat, Instagram, Twitter, and WhatsApp, and that also exists over here. If you look on my iPhone, you can see that I also have these same platforms, so I can sync my messages across the two platforms using Beeper. So, messaging, quick share, all those things, they are the equivalent to what you would get on the iPhone. And I think overall, Android has a very simple to use interface for most of the major OEMs. Like I said, Samsung being my defining example here because I personally love One UI, but Pixel, Xiaomi even, they have really great operating systems as well. The next misconception, in my view, is that Android is buggier, laggier than iOS. Now, this is something also that years ago may have been true, but with One UI 8 and coming up with One UI 8.5, the animations on One UI 8 are just almost flawless in my opinion. There's really no difference in smoothness navigating through your Android phone, going through the iPhone. I've been using this iPhone 17 Pro Max, like I said, and the iPhone Air for the last few weeks, and I don't really notice any difference in smoothness. If anything, the Samsung phone has less bugs on One UI 8 stable than iOS 26, in my opinion. I see all kinds of weird force closes on my iPhone with some weird aberrations with typing and things like that. And like I said, you can see the app opening animation very fast on your Galaxy phone. Pulling down your settings menu, your quick control, everything is lightning fast. So while it used to be true that back in the TouchWiz days, Samsung was really behind in this particular category, there was a lot of lag, there was a lot of problems there. The one place I would say, which we'll talk about more in a second, is camera, that Samsung could catch up with some of the shutter lag. But with the general interface and day-to-day use, Samsung is right there with iOS 26, if not surpassing it in many ways. The next common misconception is that Android phones have awful cameras. Now, this is certainly no longer the case, although I will give the iPhone its just due. When it comes to video performance, the iPhone is superior to many Android cameras in that particular category. But when you're talking about photo performance, there are many Android phones that can compete with the iPhone. The S25 Ultra, admittedly, is a little bit behind, and Samsung really does need to catch up on the hardware and software processing front. However, if you take in this other Android phone that we were taking a look at earlier, the Pixel 10 Pro XL, I think most people would agree that the camera on this phone can compete, shot for shot with the iPhone and takes amazing photos. Video also on the Galaxy S25 Ultra and Pixel 10 Pro is passable, but still slightly behind the iPhone. But there are other Android manufacturers like Xiaomi, like Huawei, like Vivo in China who are really bringing some cutting edge imaging technology. Hopefully Samsung and Google will catch up there. Right now, it seems like they're really focused on software processing, but it's definitely not the case that Android phones have terrible cameras and are way behind the iPhone. A lot of times when people are thinking about that, they're thinking about budget Android phones. They're not thinking about the Pixel. They're not thinking about the Galaxy phone. They're really pitting something like the iPhone 17 Pro Max against, a budget Samsung M phone or a budget Samsung A phone. And of course, the camera is going to be worse because those phones cost maybe $1,000 less than this iPhone. But if you put a flagship Android against the iPhone, for the photos side, it's really going to be up to your preference, as you guys can see some of those images that I just went through on the camera roll, as to what you prefer in terms of the processing and things like that. The way they, process things for low light, the way things look in terms of the color profile. The last common misconception about Android phones these days from iOS users, in my opinion, is about updates. So it was the case, and it still is the case, that Apple does a little better with updates, but a lot of people seem to think, if you're an iOS user, that if you're on Android, you won't get any updates ever. Or basically, you won't get monthly updates, you don't get monthly security updates, the phones are less secure because of that, and all of these various things. And they also seem to think that, like, the Google Play Store is the Wild West, you're going to get viruses. None of that stuff is really true. Samsung and Google both push out monthly security patch updates. They're not all going out to the same phone, every phone at the same time like an iPhone does, but they do roll out within a couple weeks, and Samsung does a very good job. They're one of the best OEMs with this, along with Google. In addition, both Samsung and Google do not just one, but 2 or 3 updates a year where they do feature drops. With iOS, you're only going to get that one big update a year in September when they release a new iPhone. And sometimes Apple do one more other big feature update a year with a point release. Whereas with Samsung, you're going to get one update when the foldables release in July, and you'll get one update again when the S series launches in January. So I really think that this misconception is one of the biggest ones. Security is great on Android. The Google Play Store is definitely not the Wild West if you compare it to the App Store. It's very secure. Google does a lot of checks. Samsung does a lot of checks. There's a lot of tools like Auto Blocker that make it really hard to install malicious applications on your Galaxy phone, and similar things on the Pixel phone. Like I said, Google does a lot of checks in the Play Store themselves, and they're even trying to come up with more ways with the Verified Developer Program to make sure that people are not installing malware on their phones on Android. So definitely, if you're worried about that, not getting updates at all, or security issues, that is not a problem if you want to switch from iPhone to Android. Now, I will give Apple their kudos. Certainly when they push out an update like iOS 26, all eligible iPhones get it at the same time on the same day. It's very difficult for Samsung to do that, and for any Android OEM to do that, because they have so many different phones with different processors at different price points, whereas Apple makes their own processor in-house. They also make the OS, and also they don't sell phones at as many price points, different processors, as Samsung. So it's really unreasonable to hold Samsung to that standard, but I do hope that eventually they will get all their flagships on the current year and the previous year cycle updated on the same day when a new version of One UI comes out. Anyway, I hope you guys enjoyed the video. If you did, like, comment, subscribe, hit the notification icon below. What do you guys think? Are these still misconceptions that iOS users or anybody has about Android? And are there any that I missed? Definitely let me know if there's some that you think I missed below. Love to chat with you guys. Like, comment, subscribe. Also check out Sammy Guru if you're a big Samsung fan, our new Samsung channel where we're covering Samsung stuff every day over there. Check out sammyguru.com as well, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Thanks a lot for watching.